I'll wait another minute or two to see if anybody else swings by. Okay, we might as well go ahead and get started. Let's see. There's not a lot new on our end this week. We've still got the latest mate viewer out as the most recent viewer release. I think that's Vincenzo. So you should be seeing a bunch of RC viewers getting updated as those go through QA. Yeah, other than that, it's probably mostly just doings behind the scene last few days. I've been poking on Arctan some more, trying to get good test data for the textures, trying to make an object that has, thousands of different textures of the desired resolution is a little bit of a pain, but I've got some stuff assembled now. What does multi-partial inventory name search mean? Oh, okay, cool. Hadn't heard about that one. Oh, Lucy, did you ever try that test viewer to see if it helped with the once per second pause glitch that you were seeing? Yeah, it's not actually in the Muscadine viewer. It's just in a I think it's actually an Arctan build that I gave you, but I was just curious if it affected the stuttering that you'd been seeing earlier. Yeah, Muscadine hasn't been updated for a while. I've pulled it from viewer release since Vincenzo went out. So there is a build for that, but it hasn't been submitted for QA yet. It's a little lower priority since it's a project viewer, and we've got stuff that ahead of it in line for. I also need to update the Muscadine server build. That hasn't been updated for a while either. Just to pull the latest simulator changes. So at some point we'll be getting to that, but hopefully one of these days I'll get to work on some actual features there too. We'll see. So I guess other than that, Yuka, do you want to say anything about latest and greatest with EAP?
Yeah, it's mostly unchanged because Tom and I are still pretty new here and haven't quite figured out. We're still absorbing, so we haven't made any changes in the last couple of weeks. You can probably expect to start seeing those coming in the coming weeks or thereabouts. But yeah, there's really nothing different in the current build.
I think the version of EAP that's in, I think I had a version of EAP that was tested for RC that had like a couple of UI changes, but the problem is it also picked up some changes that were made before these guys started that hadn't been released yet, and those caused some other features to work less well than they had been. So basically it's not really in a state where we're shipping it right now. So as we continue to work on EAP, we'll be prioritizing fixing those regressions. So hopefully each RC that actually goes out is better than the one before. Yeah, I don't know about key querying. So you're asking about, is there an alternative to using an LSL function to do that? Yeah, that's a good point. Most of the APIs, if you could call it that we provide are going through LSL, but I can understand why that would be a concern in some cases. Yeah, details on changing names are TBD. I think you would want to allow for the possibility that they could change more than once, though.
Yes, the plan of record that I know of is you can change names multiple times.
Yeah, there is a fee, so I don't think you have to worry about people doing it, 5 times a second or something. But you would have to.
That would get expensive.
That it could change more than once.
That would get expensive, yes. But if you wanted to, I guess if you wanted to keep paying us.
Yeah, I don't know if we really want to throttle that.
And Kira, yes, all there won't be collisions. A name once used, once used is always yours. Nope.
Lucy, you asked about changing the allowed frequency for body shape changes. Yeah, I mean, we're not ruling out changing the value. It's just I haven't been working on it, so the numbers haven't changed.
No, Kira Abattoir would not be freed up, and in fact, we need to make some changes to the scripts so that Kira Abattoir would always return your UUID.
On the other hand, I'm not sure if the Mickey Mouse thing would be allowed. Probably not.
Some of those questions are yet to be worked out.
Question about adding additional sliders for some of the additional bones that Bento introduced. That is a feature that we have in the pipeline, is something that we may work on, but we don't have a definite place in the roadmap for it. So you know, maybe sometime, but not right away. It's clear that it would be nice to be able to have you know, some additional sliders that do things with the, you know, the new potentially some of the new face bones, or you know, the being able to adjust wing length, or you know, tail width or whatever. So it's certainly a reasonable thing to contemplate. There's a question about whether we have a plan to add a service for the named ID map. No, I mean, I don't even recall the subject coming up before, so it's definitely not on our roadmap currently. But you know, if there turns out to be a ton of demand, it might be something we'd discuss.
I think I saw something, I mean, about that on the forums. I don't recall. I was just scanning. But if you know, if you had an object somewhere that was an HTTP server, it could certainly make the call for you.
There is something I wanted to bring up with the alpha blending channel, if that's fine.
Yeah, fire away.
So a lot of my peers, I'm not going to speak for everyone because there's a larger majority of people that don't really understand how alpha blending works in Second Life, and mainly because it's due to the bug of alpha Z sorting. So what I wanted to do is try to implement a way for items to be compatible with each other. So, for example, like a draw order sort of ID system. So currently, hair is over eyebrows. If it's mesh, the eyebrows usually just cut out the hair if it's all set to alpha blending. But I was wondering if there was a way to kind of tell the renderer to render the eyebrows first, then the hair second.
You mean if the hair and the eyebrows are both mesh objects?
Correct.
I mean, I'm not sure how you'd get a consistent ordering there currently, since the the rendering system doesn't know one way or another what those objects are.
One of the things that I was thinking is in the object properties or something, just set it as a lower number, because currently the way draw order works is you also have to attach the object in a certain way to assign the vertex order. And then after you do that, if there's any kind of material IDs, essentially select faces, you have to make sure that the overlay in object is above a number above the underlaying object. So for example, overlaid object has to be 2 and the underlaid object has to be 1. In terms of select faces, for the clipping to not be an issue. This is primarily to do with rigged objects too. But what my suggestion was is to allow sort of a number similar to that number to allow 2 different creators' items to be compatible with each other rather than vice versa.
So basically to have a way to control sort order. Yeah, I don't know if there was, say, a number you could attach that determined the priority of objects or something. It still seems like it would be pretty hit or miss whether one person's content would be compatible with someone else's content, right? Because they could adopt their own conventions for what numbers to choose or whatever.
To simplify the problem, is what I'm suggesting is the whole object, not just the faces. The faces itself have to be on the creator solely on fixing that problem. They have to understand why it happens and how to control it. What I'm suggesting is to essentially just have, let's say, a different object rendered at a different time. That makes sense?
I mean, I think so. But if you, I'm just saying that if you have some additional attribute associated with each object that affects the sort of sort order, then how do you get different content creators to use a consistent scheme for what numbers to pick? I think my prediction would be that everybody would try to put their stuff in front, and so everybody would pick
That was a concern of mine.
Most value is like the loudness wars in music,
That was a concern of mine at first, but honestly, the number would be arbitrary. So you could technically put it to max. It wouldn't really matter. I guess the way to handle that is to inform people that, if you have eyebrows or facial hair, maybe put it to 1. If you've got hair on your head, put it to 2. Stuff like that.
Yeah, it's an interesting idea. Euclid, any thoughts on options people might potentially have to control sorting of alpha, objects better than they currently can?
Yeah, I worry that it would be pretty expensive to allow user selectable rendering order. And again, I haven't been in this chunk of code, so I don't know exactly how it works right now. But just speaking in generalities, Z depth or Z order is view dependent. So, if the renderer is sorting alpha objects, I sort of assume it is. That's going to sort differently depending on where you're standing or what you're looking at. As the avatar turns its head, the Z order will change from a particular point of view. So again, I don't know what how it's currently being done. There are algorithms for order-independent transparency that attempt to not sort and still blend appropriately. I don't know that we've implemented any of those either. So again, I'm just going to plead ignorance. I sort of know what you're talking about, but I don't know what's currently being done.
Yeah, I mean, our handling of alpha objects is, sort order wise, is certainly very imperfect. It's pretty easy to generate cases where stuff appears in kind of an unintuitive way.
So to answer the question in terms of alpha blending and alpha masking, the reason why I use alpha blending is for two reasons. Anti-aliasing is one of them. The edges around the object are pretty harsh with alpha masking, whereas it kind of smooths out with alpha blending. The second reason is due to transparency. If your object is slightly transparent, you can't achieve the same effect with alpha masking, and that's the reason why I need alpha blending. Well, it's not so much an artist issue as it is an efficiency issue, because the alternative is to include more triangles into the product.
Okay, well, I mean, I guess in general terms, we can say that, we will continue to look at the behavior of the rendering engine and try to improve things over time, but we don't have any, immediate plans to try to address sort issues. If we've got, speaking of sort issues, we've got a lot of other stuff kind of in.
I mean, if there isn't already an issue up in Jira, maybe if you could put in an example of the eyebrow and hair problem, we could at least treat it as a feature request and have a record of it.
Yeah, it is always helpful to have those things in the system. When when we do get a chance to look at them, we can point to, oh yeah, we should take a look at this thing, while we're at it.
I could get some documentation up or see what I can do as far as that goes.
Yeah. Okay, sounds good.
Well, it is actually a problem limited to SL because current engines don't really have problems with alpha sorting anymore, but that's besides the point. It's a wide-known issue that's been in the game industry. I know what you're talking about. The problem is the bug essentially taking place. Alpha sorting isn't an issue as long as you can tell the renderer on how it's being rendered. But if it's constantly clipping with itself, then yes, it is an issue. It is very costly. That's sort of the difference. Essentially, it's on how you build your object, not on like how the bug works, if that makes sense. It is. Which, why my suggestion was to sort of make the shared objects compatible with each other. We can control alpha Z sorting in SL right now, primarily with our own objects. Like, I have 100% full control over that. You can control it. I've made pixie wings that are controlled by it. I have made several objects that are controlled by it. In terms of other creators' items, that's where the issue lies. And that's not so much as a creator issue as so much just a render issue. Well, it's not so much as someone doing something horrible with their objects as it's something as if they do something correctly, is what I'm saying. If you make your item in the correct manner, where there's no alpha Z sorting in the eyebrows, no alpha Z sorting in the hair, you're still going to get the issue that I explained, that it's going to clip anyway, because you're not the creator of those eyebrows, you're not the creator of the hair, so you have no way of telling the render engine what to render first.
So the eyebrows get along with themselves and the hair gets along with itself, but when they're both kind of co-located in space, then the renderer doesn't know the ordering. Is that what you're saying?
Correct. Actually, eyebrows on baked on mesh still has an issue because it's still an alpha. It doesn't really matter if it's baked on mesh or not. I mean, using the alpha system with baked on mesh, it still has issues, unless it's alpha masking.
I think the point was if you're using the built-in system layers to do eyebrows, then it isn't really getting resolved by the render at all. It's getting resolved by the baking service. The baking service has a model.
Yeah,
system avatar.
I've been playing around with that with the alpha sorting issue, and it still actually has issues with the system layers, is what I'm saying. Even if you don't include an alpha with your thing, if you use the system alpha to sort of create a eyebrow texture, it still has that same issue, unless it's alpha masking. I'm probably misunderstanding, Kyra, I'm sorry.
I mean, if you have a baked on mesh, mesh where the eyebrows are getting modeled in some other way, then you could certainly still have issues. The point is, if you were using just the kind of system eyebrow layers, then basically everything has gotten resolved into a single baked mesh by the time it's displayed, so it shouldn't. There isn't really any scope for the render to get confused, if all the content is in that form.
I mean, the main reason why I bring it up is because alphas are catalysts to making your items incredibly efficient. This is one example that I have. All the geometry in that photo there, at the end of the cloak, is completely fake. It is just an alpha, or rather alpha masking is what I plan on using on it.
So you mean none of there isn't really any associated surface geometry for this? It's just a kind of a
It's literally just a texture in a normal.
texture on a plane. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's a nice effect.
No, it's not a crime, but if you have the border be in geometry, the problem with trying to mimic a silhouette is you have to include a bunch of triangles into the mesh, which causes the render engine to go nuts. And you get FPS issues and all sorts of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I can see that, although, honestly, if the only place that we had too many polys was on silhouette edges, we would be in pretty good shape compared to what we have today.
I agree with that 100%. Well, specifically on that cloak, it's probably more like 2,000 to 3,000 triangles or polygons. The difference. And if it's 100 polygons, it's actually very beneficial, mainly because of how you got to think of how many people are going to be wearing this item and how many people are going to be rendered in a single setting. So if 60 people, let's say, are wearing the item, that's about 100 times 60 that you're saving from the renderer having to do, or your GPU's melting, essentially. I do understand what you mean, and I completely agree if the item was being used once, if that makes sense. Yeah, I understand what the mesh bodies are doing, and there's really not much I personally can do about it, aside from making my own body and somehow getting popular with it. But the problem with making your own bodies is that it increases the workload of creators. Honestly, I'd like to see um, Second Life release an official 2.0 avatar on top of the current one, so none of the backwards compatible items are affected, but like release something on top of it. That would be amazing. And then with a brand new UVW that doesn't have any kind of stretching. Well, it would probably improve it because the model would probably be efficient and at least some people would use it, and it would allow us to sort of simplify the workload. Because currently you have to rig for bodies such as Belza, Maitreya, there's a new one like Legacy, and then on top of that you have to sign these weird little contracts that have typos, and it's just a mess. Oh, well, your frames wouldn't suffer. Your frames entirely would be improved. If you remove inefficient bodies from the equation, your frames in general, you'd be able to render 60 different people in one sim, and you probably just wouldn't have an issue rendering in terms of FPS. Like from a user perspective, you would no longer suffer. No, the other bodies are going to continue to exist. That's the problem with user group generated content. What I'm suggesting is if they make something on top of that, make it more popular. It's all about publicity at the end of the day. If one body overtakes the market, that becomes priority. And then eventually the others get phased out, hopefully.
It's hard to predict what the impact would be if there was a, kind of a Linden mesh body. You know, obviously we could tackle the efficiency issue, but if no one used it because it was incompatible with their existing content, then it's hard to predict how that would shake out in the marketplace of users.
The way to sort of promote that, you are correct in that, it would require creators to essentially promote this body heavily over the other ones, making exclusives and all sorts of stuff. Another way you could promote it is maybe making some exclusive features to that Linden body, even though people will hate it. If it has a feature that is better than what the other bodies have, then people will use it, essentially. But that would be sort of forceful. No, I agree with you, Elizabeth. It would create confusion for new users, and in the sense users are already pretty much confused. So it would have to be elaborated completely to the point where new users could be easily gather on how to work that. But in terms of bodies, the only way that we can force bodies to, I mean, you could technically force them to do it now with the bakes on mesh system. Instead of them, cutting the bodies in tiny little parts so they can have different material IDs, we can at the very least get them to weld them and then have them update their bodies. And that could be a fast and effective way to trying to make it a little bit more efficient. FPS. Everything that I'm suggesting, Elizabeth, has to do with frames per second. This has everything to do with user experience. I disagree with you, Elizabeth. I think we don't know until we try. In the sense of, are people lazy and want HUDs? I would agree with you in that sense. But it's sort of the same issue that we have today with creators. We kind of promote laziness. Again, I disagree with you, Elizabeth, on that subject. I know what you're talking about in terms of, add more geometry and more detail to the mesh than it sells. But you can actually get better results from using the normal map system by making good content. It just depends on your understanding on retopology and how everything works. I mean, the creators, they're sort of just holding themselves back as well, that rely on upon geometry. If they know better, they're not learning anything. They're just eventually they're just stuck in that style essentially.
A lot of it comes down to time versus money. It's easier to make something very high poly very quickly, like say in ZBrush, and have a Z-remesh it, than it is to make something that looks really good, that's really efficient. And I've always been of the opinion that we need to change the rules in order to get people to game the system in the way we want them to game the system, such as making more efficient mesh. And the only way I can think of doing that is to, on the marketplace, have a score which is a combination score of how many vertices or faces that an object that is for sale is, how many texture maps, the amount of memory for the texture maps and the sizes, and then also have another score of that anybody can score it as to how attractive is it, how is this, from 1 to 100, is this a beautiful item or is this a horrible looking item? And combine those scores together, and that score then would determine where in the search results does that item fall? If it's something that's made efficient, that is beautiful, it's going to end up in a higher search result, so that item tends to be then sold more often. It has to be sort of, you got to get people to game the system and give them a reason to put extra time and effort into making something that is efficient versus something that is quick and easy, like through ZBrush and ZRemesher. That's the only way I can see that you can probably get people to make very efficient stuff that looks awesome, because then it's going to sell, because it's going to be placed higher up in the search results on the marketplace.
The point about the abusability of scoring systems, it's certainly true that you're never going to come up with something that can't be gamed to some extent. The best you can hope for is to come up with something that works better than what you already have, and that's really what we're shooting for with Arctan. The question about whether we can have scoring information in the marketplace is also a good one, and it's come up in discussions before, but it would really be a if we try to do something like that, it would really be kind of a next step. It wouldn't be part of the actual work for Arctan. I mean, that's a big job in itself. I think part of the problem there is just identifying what you're selling. I mean, there can be a lot of layers of indirection between what the user buys versus what the actual product that they wind up wearing is. And so we were trying to auto score stuff. I mean, do we wind up just scoring the box that it comes in or something? It's not always obvious even where the content is, because it can depend on scripts and stuff that gets downloaded and so on.
Right. Oh, I agree. But I mean, but you could have, just like you have rules in the marketplace of what you can do and what you can't do, is if you misrepresent your item on the marketplace as to how many, say you're not putting the actual item in the box that you're delivering, that you're putting some sort of link to a landmark where people could then go and get the actual item, because that's the way they're gaming the system, is that if you make that against the rules and somebody finds out and reports them that that's what they're doing, then they face the consequences of being banned or something like that. So yeah, there's never an absolute perfect system that's automated that can't be gamed. It's just that once you find somebody who is gaming the system against the rules, that there is a penalty for them for that, such as their account gets banned or deleted. But that's why I also suggested that having a score where anybody who looks at the item on the marketplace can give it a score of what they think, how attractive do they think it is, so that there is an interaction between the people who are going to buy it and the actual score of the item itself, of how many vertices or faces it is, and which is automatic. The number of vertices that are contained inside the box, the delivery box, and the number of textures that are in the delivery box. That those two scores are automatically, and then the third part is just aesthetics. What the average person looking at it can click on it to say how attractive they think it is.
In practice, it would be much easier to score a worn avatar than it would be to score something in the marketplace, right? If somebody is actually dressed in a particular set of items, then that all gets looked at by the bake service. The bake service could do more analysis than it does now, and could actually figure out, okay, how many textures are there, and how large are the meshes, and so on. One possible thing that could happen with Arctan is that we actually move the rendering cost calculations into So that's really easy, but
You cut out there.
as we say, the connection between what people buy and what they actually wind up, how to use it some.
I mean, in terms of the idea, I like it, but I think one small step could be made, and that's just making people aware of what's going on. So, for example, since I'm aware, and if I see someone with a million triangles on their body or something and a small little bracelet, I'll just derender the person. So making people more aware of inefficient models and why it happens and what it does to your FPS would probably be a nice step. Additionally, just saying this person's bracelet is currently making your FPS go to 20.
Yeah, I think giving people better feedback about what are the expensive things in the scene, whether it's other avatars or whether it's static content like buildings, would help. Right now, I think people often don't kind of know the connection between the fact that their performance is bad and the particular things in their field of view that are making the difference.
The current Lucy, the current people I'm talking about are the people that have no idea what the creator world is like. The people that use presets over, customizing their graphics, those kinds of people. And that's kind of a huge majority of the population in Second Life is those sort of people, which is there's nothing wrong with it. You're a consumer. And that's sort of what I'm saying is somehow making those people aware of what the models are doing. To some extent, I do agree with you, Elizabeth, but the current uploader and how it works, it doesn't work. It encourages bad behavior. I do agree with you, Elizabeth. At a certain point, it's creators' faults. But the way that the uploader works currently, it promotes bad behavior.
In terms of the costs imposed by the uploader, or in terms of the tools we provide for kind of feedback at the time of upload?
In terms of costs, like if you 2 weeks ago the example that I gave about the couch that Elizabeth is sitting on and the little Animesh guy that's about 1,000 triangles, it's about 64 land impact, but the couch is only 66 land impact. It's detrimental. Like it does size is arbitrary. It does not matter. You're still rendering 100,000 triangles to the render engine. But it's being promoted as 6 land impact versus the guy behind me, which is 64. It's nuts. And that's the sense that I wanted to give. Also, another example that I could give is a recent project I was working on. I was making grass. Very efficient grass. It's not the laggy kind. And I actually could have fit in about 300 patches of grass into the mesh object, but I was restricted because of size, and triangles and render wouldn't have been affected whatsoever.
The suggestion to have you know, more tools for automated mesh reduction is very tempting. And of course, that would actually give us a path forward to address the content that's already out there in the world with horrible LODs as well. But it's obviously that would be a big challenge to get something that worked consistently and gave acceptable results. Yeah, I agree. The way we handle size is one of the biggest problems with our current cost formulas. You know, it doesn't really matter whether you're looking at you know, the same number of triangles and you're, you know, zooming out to see it versus for a big object versus you know, the same number of triangles on a you know, on a you know, ring that's on your avatar, but it's still getting displayed at full detail because your avatar. That is one of the things we looked at when we were looking at the cost functions for Animesh, which was you know, removing the dependency on size entirely. But,
I mean, I do want to say that I understand why size is there. I understand why it's even a factor at all. It's because of the LOD system, which is why I made that JIRA to separate size from LOD. If you separate size from LOD, you can essentially just make the cost solely based on when the LOD pops, rather than what it is right now. Which is sort of the same system that you have going on, only size would no longer be a factor. So you could have a 64 by 64 meter object, or wherever the max is, but the LOD may pop sooner, which would allow consistency between smaller and bigger objects. So you wouldn't have like the smaller object popping before the bigger object, which makes it look really weird. Aki actually has a good point, and a very good example is something that I wrote in the JIRA is that if you make a mesh tree, it may be more efficient than a sculpted tree, like the sculpties. But sculpties are prized over because of the lower land impact, even though they're less efficient than the mesh tree, which is sort of an issue right now too.
okay, well, we should probably be wrapping up for this week. I'm going to have to run off in any case. Let's see, we've got a couple of gaps in the schedule coming up. No meeting next week and no meeting the week after that. So that's the end of October and then the first week of November, and then we should be back on a regular schedule for 2 weeks after that. Let's see. So yeah, otherwise we'll keep you posted, and we'll hope to have the ArcTan far enough along that we can start doing kind of data collection across a range of different hardware pretty soon, and see how that all shakes out. Thanks for coming, everybody.
Awesome. Thanks, Vir. Thanks, Lindens. Thanks, everyone. See you in a few weeks.
Bye all.